On the planet Varelia, life had always been serene and orderly. The planet orbited a quiet yellow star, and its surface was covered in lush green forests, crystal-clear rivers, and sparkling cities made of a material that seemed to glow softly in sunlight. Varelians were a highly advanced species. Their technology was far beyond anything most other civilizations had ever seen. They had mastered space travel, medical science, and artificial intelligence. And their society was built on collaboration and knowledge rather than war. They took pride in their long history of diplomacy, scientific discovery, and peaceful coexistence with neighboring planets. Conflict was almost unheard of on Var, and the Varelians often thought of themselves as a species beyond fear or danger. Yet, despite their advanced society, there was one thing that had haunted their history for generations: the stories of the Death. These stories were passed down from scholars, travelers, and the oldest historical records. According to legend, the Deathworlders were a species from a planet so harsh that only the strongest, most adaptable creatures could survive there. Their world was said to be filled with deadly storms, poisonous air, and predators capable of killing almost anything in an instant. Every child on Varelia grew up hearing tales of the Deathworlders, how they were said to be fearless, extremely dangerous, and completely unpredictable. Some records even suggested that the Deathworlders had visited other planets in the past, leaving chaos wherever they went. Their very name inspired fear, caution, and sometimes dread for generations. Varelians had theorized about what would happen if the Deathworlders ever came to their planet. Scholars debated endlessly whether the stories were true or exaggerated. Some believed the Deathworlders were the ultimate conquerors, capable of destroying entire civilizations in a matter of days. Others thought they were misunderstood, merely survivors trying to adapt to the universe. Despite the disagreements, one thing was certain: the Varelians had prepared for the worst, just in case. Defense systems were designed, emergency plans were created, and a small, elite military force was trained specifically for the potential arrival of the Deathworlders. Even with all this preparation, most Varelians thought the danger would never reach them. Varelia was peaceful, and they had always believed that a species like the Deathworlders would have no reason to venture to a planet so safe and calm. Life went on. Normally, children went to school, scientists conducted experiments in floating laboratories, and cities thrived with culture, art, and innovation. The idea of an actual Deathworlder invasion was more like a bedtime story or a distant myth than a real threat. That sense of security began to change one ordinary morning. The alarm systems on Varelia, which had rarely been used, suddenly lit up in bright red across every city. A fleet of ships had been detected entering Varelia's space. The first reports were unclear. Sensors could only identify that these were large, powerful ships approaching from the outer edge of the star system. The Council, which was the ruling body of Varelia, immediately convened an emergency meeting. Panic, which had been almost non-existent in Varelian society, began to spread. Citizens crowded around news terminals, anxious for any information. Families held on to each other, unsure of what was coming. The Council had little time to make decisions. The fleet's movements suggested intent. These ships were moving with purpose, not just drifting through space. Varelian historians and scientists recognized the formation immediately. It matched the descriptions in the oldest records of Deathworlder fleets. Fear gripped the planet. For centuries, Varelians had thought of themselves as capable of managing almost any crisis. Yet, staring at the approaching fleet, even the most confident among them felt a cold sense of uncertainty. Could their defenses withstand a species reputed to be unstoppable? Were all the emergency plans sufficient against such a threat? These questions hung in the air like a heavy fog, and no one could answer them confidently. The citizens' reactions were as varied as the species itself. Some fled to emergency shelters, bringing with them only what they could carry. Others stayed close to their homes, hoping that the fleet's intent might be peaceful. Though deep down, almost everyone feared the worst. News channels broadcasted warnings, safety instructions, and updates. But the panic continued to spread. In public squares, people gathered to discuss rumors and speculate about what the Deathworlders wanted. Theories ranged from the fleet seeking resources, to colonization, to complete destruction. The unknown factor was terrifying. No one had ever seen a real Deathworlder in person. The stories had always been distant, theoretical, and second-hand. Now, the myths were about to become reality. As the fleet drew closer, the Council faced one of the toughest decisions in their history. Should they prepare to attack first, risking the destruction of their own cities, or should they attempt to communicate peacefully, hoping that the Deathworlders were not inherently hostile? Some Council members argued for immediate defensive action. They believed that history showed that the Deathworlders attacked first and asked questions later. Others countered that attacking first might provoke a war that could otherwise have been avoided. The debate raged for hours, with tension escalating as the fleet moved steadily closer to the planet's orbit. Amid this chaos, scientists worked frantically to analyze every available piece of data about the incoming fleet. Advanced scanning systems measured the ship's size, composition, and trajectory. The results were astonishing. These were no ordinary vessels. They were heavily fortified, yet their movements suggested efficiency and precision rather than blind aggression. Some scientists speculated that the Deathworlders might have evolved beyond simple warfare, using strategy and intelligence in ways the Varelians could not yet understand. Every calculation, however, led to more questions than answers. Families across Varelia struggled to maintain a sense of normalcy. Parents tried to comfort children, explaining that the stories of the Deathworlders might be exaggerated. Schools tried to continue lessons, though fear permeated the classrooms. Markets operated under tight security, and public transport was restricted to emergency services. The entire planet seemed to be holding its collective breath, waiting to see what would happen when the fleet finally arrived. In this phase, the Varelians were not just facing an external threat, they were confronting their own assumptions, fears, and myths. Everything they had believed about the universe, about danger, and about the Deathworlders themselves was being tested. For the first time in generations, the Varelians felt the vulnerability that other civilizations had always faced. The realization that no matter how advanced a society might be, some things in the universe were unpredictable and beyond control. Throughout this tense period, stories from the past resurfaced. Elder historians reminded the Council of how legends had always contained a kernel of truth. For every story of the Deathworlders' supposed cruelty, there were accounts of their ingenuity, survival skills, and remarkable adaptability. Some argued that these traits could be harnessed for peace rather than war, while others insisted that such reasoning was too risky. The debate illustrated the complexity of facing an unknown species. Fear, history, and speculation all collided in a chaotic mix. Finally, as the fleet entered closer orbit, a mixture of awe and terror filled the hearts of the Varelians. The ships were enormous, casting shadows over cities below. Their design was unlike anything Varelian engineers had seen, featuring sharp angles, armored hulls, and glowing engines that hummed with immense power. Citizens gathered near windows, on rooftops, and in open spaces, watching silently as the legendary Deathworlders arrived, not in myth, not in imagination, but in reality. This was a moment that would be remembered forever in Varelian history. The day the myths came alive. The day a civilization known for peace confronted what it had feared for centuries. The anticipation, the fear, and the uncertainty created a tense atmosphere that blanketed the planet. It was not just the arrival of a fleet, it was the arrival of history, a turning point that would test every value, every belief, and every assumption the Varelians had held about themselves and the universe around them. The Varelians had seen the fleet, felt the fear, and debated the responses. Everything else, the rising challenges, the actions of the humans, and the consequences, was still to come. But in this moment, they experienced something profound, the full weight of the unknown. It was a rare and humbling reminder that no matter how advanced, how intelligent, or how peaceful a civilization might be, some forces in the universe could inspire respect and fear all at once. And so Varelia waited, poised on the edge of an extraordinary encounter, not yet knowing that the Deathworlders would arrive not as conquerors, but as unexpected allies. As the enormous fleet of Deathworlder ships drew closer to Varelia, the planet's residents felt a mixture of awe and fear unlike anything they had ever experienced. What had been a distant myth, a story told in textbooks and legends, was now real and unavoidable. The alarms that had first sounded a few hours ago continued to echo across the cities, blending with the soft hum of Varelian machinery and the nervous whispers of its citizens. In the council chambers, the atmosphere was tense and heavy, filled with debate, uncertainty, and, for the first time in centuries, fear. The council had gathered in their emergency chamber, a large circular room made of smooth, glowing material that reflected the concern in everyone's eyes. The council members, normally calm and precise in their deliberations, found themselves in an unusual state of confusion. Each member had their own perspective. Some argued that the Deathworlders were undoubtedly hostile and that the only way to survive was to prepare for immediate defense. They believed that waiting could mean giving the enemy time to strategize, and in the case of a species as legendary as the Deathworlders, that could be fatal. Others, however, urged caution. They reminded the council that their data was incomplete, that no one truly knew the intentions of the fleet, and that acting aggressively could provoke a species whose power and adaptability were unknown. The more cautious members pointed to historical accounts that described the Deathworlders' intelligence and strategic thinking. According to these records, the Deathworlders were not mindless conquerors. They were survivors, problem solvers, and remarkably adaptive. This suggested that, if provoked, the consequences could be catastrophic. The council was divided, and the tension was visible in the lines of every face present. Outside the council chamber, Varelians of all ages experienced their own challenges. Families huddled together in homes, peeking nervously through windows or watching public screens that showed the approaching fleet. Shops and markets struggled to operate under the sudden emergency. Some citizens tried to continue with their daily routines, convincing themselves that panic would only worsen the situation. But the reality of the fleet's presence made that nearly impossible. The feeling of uncertainty spread like wildfire. Even the most disciplined citizens found themselves questioning every plan and precaution they had ever believed in. The scientists, engineers, and military strategists of Varelia faced challenges of their own. They worked tirelessly, trying to analyze every aspect of the incoming fleet. The ships were vast, massive beyond anything they had ever encountered. Yet there was something in their movement that puzzled the experts. The fleet maintained a precise formation, yet it did not behave like a typical attack formation. The ships did not fire their weapons or move aggressively toward the planet's surface. Instead, they seemed almost calculated, almost deliberate in a way that suggested intelligence and intent beyond simple aggression. Attempts to communicate with the fleet were met with silence. The Varelian translators, capable of decoding hundreds of languages and signals, struggled to make sense of the transmissions coming from the ships. Their technology seemed advanced but entirely alien, unlike anything they had encountered in previous interstellar communication attempts. Every attempt to decipher their messages ended in frustration, which only heightened the tension. Time moved slowly, and with each passing moment, the pressure on the council and the scientists intensified. The citizens themselves were not passive observers. Many volunteers joined the emergency response teams, helping to prepare shelters, transport resources, and maintain order in the streets. The sight of ordinary citizens stepping up in the face of an unprecedented threat was both inspiring and a stark reminder of how serious the situation had become. Public spaces were filled with anxious energy. Some groups tried to maintain morale by sharing stories and comforting each other, while others became consumed by fear and suspicion. It was clear that Varelia, despite its technological prowess and history of peace, was entering uncharted territory. As the fleet approached, it became clear that the challenge was not only external but also internal. The fear and uncertainty brought out differing reactions among the population. Some citizens were proactive, taking measures to secure their homes and loved ones. Others became paralyzed by panic, unable to focus or make decisions. Rumors began circulating about the fleet's intent. Some claimed that the Deathworlders would destroy the planet. Others suggested they might enslave the population, and a few even dared to hope that perhaps the stories of hostility were exaggerated. The variety of reactions reflected a deeper challenge. How could a civilization known for intelligence, organization, and planning respond effectively to something it had never truly encountered before? Meanwhile, the council and military leaders faced logistical nightmares. Defensive systems were activated across the planet, but their effectiveness was unknown. Energy shields were deployed over major cities, defensive drones were prepared for immediate action, and communication channels were set up to coordinate emergency responses. The military strategists had to make difficult decisions, deciding which areas of the planet to prioritize for protection and which to leave vulnerable. Every choice carried consequences, and the unknown nature of the fleet made every decision feel like a gamble. Amid these preparations, a group of Varelian scientists made a startling observation. The fleet's movement patterns did not match those of typical attacking forces. The ships seemed to avoid areas that would be strategically advantageous for an attack, instead moving in ways that suggested observation or reconnaissance. This revelation introduced a new layer of uncertainty. Could it be possible that the Deathworlders were not here to attack at all? The idea seemed almost impossible given the historical accounts, yet the evidence could not be ignored. It created a new kind of tension, one fueled not by fear of destruction, but by the confusion of not knowing what to expect. The psychological strain on the population increased as the hours passed. Anxiety, fear, and anticipation created a palpable atmosphere of tension. Children asked endless questions, adults whispered theories and plans, and even the council members found themselves second-guessing every decision. The very foundations of Varelian society, their confidence, their sense of control, and their understanding of the universe were being challenged. Every citizen felt the weight of history pressing down on them. The Deathworlders were no longer a story or a legend. They were real, present, and imposing. In addition to fear, there was also an emerging sense of opportunity among some citizens. Scholars and historians debated the possibility that this encounter could redefine the planet's place in the galaxy. If the Deathworlders were as advanced as story suggested, and if they could be reasoned with, Varelia might have the chance to form alliances, gain knowledge, and learn from a species whose survival skills were unparalleled. This glimmer of hope coexisted uneasily with the fear, creating a complex emotional landscape across the planet. The Council decided to implement a tiered response plan. Emergency shelters were opened for civilians, evacuation routes were established, and communication networks were expanded to provide constant updates. Military forces were mobilized and positioned in strategic locations, prepared to defend against the worst-case scenario. Scientists continued to study the fleet, attempting to uncover any clue about their intentions or capabilities. Citizens were encouraged to remain calm, though the pervasive fear made this easier said than done. As the fleet moved ever closer, the Varelians had to confront another challenge. Could they trust the historical accounts that described the Deathworlders as violent and unpredictable? Could they trust their own instincts and judgment? in the face of an unprecedented event? And most importantly, could they trust that any action they took would lead to survival rather than destruction? These questions haunted the council, the scientists, and the population alike. Every decision carried the weight of potential catastrophe. The tension reached its peak when a scout ship from the fleet entered the upper atmosphere. This was the first direct contact Varelia had with the Deathworlders, and it triggered a wave of panic and preparation across the planet. Citizens rushed to shelters, military forces scrambled to defend key locations, and communication channels buzzed with urgent messages. Everyone understood that the next few hours could determine the fate of their civilization. The challenge had evolved from anticipation to immediate action, and the stakes could not have been higher. In this phase, the Varelians faced not only the external threat of the Deathworlders but also the internal struggle of fear, uncertainty, and conflicting information. The rising challenge was not simply about defense or strategy. It was about the ability of an entire society to respond under pressure, to confront myths and fears, and to make decisions when the outcome was unknown. Every citizen, every council member, and every scientist played a role in this collective challenge. The hours leading up to the first direct contact were filled with intense preparation, emotional strain, and mental exhaustion. Yet even in the midst of fear, there was a sense of resilience. Varelians, despite their terror, continued to act, to think, and to prepare. They demonstrated remarkable adaptability, creativity, and determination, all of which would prove crucial in the next phase of the encounter. By the time the scout ship landed, the rising challenge had reached its peak. The Varelians had mobilized every resource at their disposal. Yet the question of the Deathworlders' intent remained unanswered. Fear, anticipation, hope, and uncertainty collided, setting the stage for a moment that would define the future of the planet. The challenge was no longer theoretical. It was real, immediate, and undeniable. How Varelia responded in the next moments would determine not only survival but the potential for a historic encounter unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The rising challenge was not just the presence of the death, but the test of Varelia's courage, intelligence, and unity. Every citizen, every scientist, and every council member would soon discover that myths and legends, while frightening, could sometimes be misunderstood, and that survival often depended not only on preparation but on the ability to face the unknown with calm, strategy, and a willingness to adapt. As the first human shuttle descended through Varelia's atmosphere, the entire planet seemed to hold its breath. The fleet that had hovered in the outer orbit, massive and foreboding, had already created tension and fear. But this was something different. This was direct contact. The shuttle, sleek and metallic, moved with precision and purpose, cutting through the sky like a silent arrow. Citizens stopped in their tracks, craning their necks to watch, and children clutched their parents' hands tightly, sensing the significance of this moment even if they could not fully understand it. The air felt charged, heavy with anticipation, curiosity, and dread. Inside the council chamber, the atmosphere was electric. Every member, military leader, and advisor was glued to the screens showing the shuttle's descent. Some members were still advocating for defensive measures, fearing that the shuttle might carry an army disguised in diplomacy. Others urged caution, reminding everyone that even a small misstep could lead to catastrophe. Every moment felt like walking a tightrope between survival and disaster. The debate had reached a fever pitch, and the decisions made now would shape the fate of the planet. When the shuttle finally landed, there was a brief pause as the engines powered down and silence filled the landing zone. Security teams moved cautiously toward the craft, weapons ready but restrained. No one wanted to make the first move that could escalate into violence. Slowly, the hatch opened, and the world collectively leaned forward, expecting a scene of hostility or aggression. And then, the unimaginable happened. The humans who stepped out did not carry weapons. There were no armored suits, no energy blasters, no aggressive posturing. Instead, they carried crates of supplies, strange devices, and equipment that looked designed for aid rather than combat. Their movements were calm, measured, and deliberate, with a confidence that came from experience rather than intimidation. Their presence alone was enough to make the Varelians question everything they had believed about the Deathworlders. How could a species renowned for danger, adaptability, and unpredictability arrive with such purpose and peace? The commander of the shuttle, tall and composed, activated a translation device that immediately allowed the Varelians to understand their speech. "We have received your distress signals from the outer colonies," the human said. "We are here to assist. We mean no harm." The words were simple, yet their effect was extraordinary. For centuries, Varelians had feared that any arrival of the Deathworlders would be synonymous with destruction. To hear a message of help and cooperation was shocking, almost surreal. The council members exchanged glances, some still skeptical, others struggling to contain hope. Outside the landing zone, citizens who had gathered were stunned into silence. Mothers held children tightly, workers stopped in mid-motion, and soldiers lowered their weapons slightly, still wary but increasingly confused. The humans' calm demeanor and the obvious lack of aggression sent waves of conflicting emotions across the crowd. Relief, disbelief, and a cautious curiosity all mingled together. Whispers spread quickly. They are not here to attack. Could the legends be wrong? This is impossible. The tension that had gripped the planet for so long began to shift, transforming from fear into cautious optimism. Though uncertainty still lingered, the humans immediately began working alongside Varelian emergency teams. Crates were opened to reveal medical supplies, water purifiers, and tools designed for repair and reconstruction. The outer colonies, which had sent the distress signals, had been damaged by a recent natural disaster, a storm that no technology had been able to fully prevent. The humans moved quickly and efficiently, coordinating with Varelian teams, demonstrating skills that were both practical and astonishing. Their methods were unfamiliar but highly effective, showing ingenuity, adaptability, and a level of coordination that left Varelians awestruck. The council, observing the unfolding events, faced a moment of internal reckoning. The critical moment was not just about what the humans were doing, but what their presence meant. All the fears, myths, and assumptions about the Deathworlders were being challenged. Could it be possible that centuries of stories were incomplete or misinterpreted? Could the traits that had made humans so at resilience, adaptability, and resourcefulness also be applied in a way that prioritized aid and cooperation rather than aggression? This realization was both exhilarating and disorienting for Varelian leaders. India cities. People watched as news of the humans' actions spread rapidly through holographic broadcasts and communication networks. Reports showed the humans treating injured Varelians, repairing critical infrastructure, and even calming frightened citizens in the colonies. Their ability to operate under pressure, to assess needs quickly, and to act decisively impressed even the most skeptical observers. Citizens began to whisper to one another that perhaps the Deathworlders were not the monsters history had described, but a species that thrived under challenge and adversity, using their strengths for constructive purposes when circumstances demanded it. The outer colonies, which had initially sent the distress signals, that became the focal point of this critical moment. Entire towns, damaged by natural disasters, were suddenly receiving immediate attention from humans. Hospitals that had been struggling to function were restored, power grids were repaired, and food and water distribution was organized efficiently. The people who had feared they would face annihilation were now witnessing a scene of extraordinary cooperation and skill. The critical moment for the Varelians was clear. The humans were capable of immense power, yes, but they chose to use it to save lives rather than destroy them. Military leaders observed the humans' actions with growing admiration and confusion. Their training had taught them to expect confrontation, ambush, and hostility, yet nothing of the sort occurred. Instead, the humans demonstrated qualities that had been described in myths: adaptability, intelligence, and fearlessness, but applied in ways that were completely unexpected. The council began to realize that what they had feared might have been only one side of the story. The humans were a species capable of extreme danger, but also of extreme compassion and ingenuity. As the critical moment unfolded, the humans encountered challenges that would have overwhelmed less capable beings. Structural damage in the colonies required quick thinking, technical expertise, and teamwork. Medical emergencies demanded immediate intervention under chaotic conditions. Harsh environmental conditions tested stamina and resilience. In every situation, the humans adapted. They improvised solutions, created tools on the spot, and worked tirelessly without hesitation. Their actions demonstrated a remarkable combination of intelligence, courage, and practicality, qualities that defined the Deathworlders but had never been seen in this context by Varelians before. For the citizens witnessing these events, emotions ran high. Fear was still present, but it was being replaced by awe and respect. Parents pointed to the humans as examples of skill and courage to their children. Workers and volunteers, inspired by the humans, joined in the reconstruction efforts. The streets were filled not with panic but with coordinated action, energy, and hope. The critical moment was transforming the collective mindset of Varelia, challenging assumptions and redefining what it meant to be strong or dangerous. Even within the council chamber, discussions shifted from fear to analysis and learning. Observers debated what lessons could be drawn from the humans' behavior. How did they manage to remain calm under extreme pressure? How did they coordinate so effectively across large areas? What could Varelians learn from their methods? For the first time, fear was giving way to curiosity, and the critical moment revealed that knowledge and understanding could be as valuable as any weapon or defense system. The turning point of this phase occurred when the humans directly interacted with the Varelian leaders. The commander of the human team requested a meeting with the council, explaining their mission and offering detailed plans to stabilize the outer colonies. This gesture of transparency and collaboration further shattered preconceived notions. The council realized that the humans were not only capable of extraordinary feats but were also willing to work alongside others, respecting local authority and following protocols that ensured cooperation rather than conflict. At the landing site, the critical moment reached its emotional peak when a young child from the outer colonies, frightened and injured, was rescued by one of the humans. The child had been trapped under debris from a collapsed building, and while the Varelians had struggled to extract him safely, The human acted decisively, using both ingenuity and physical skill. The child was freed unharmed, and the relief of the family was palpable. Citizens watching through broadcast systems erupted in quiet applause, a moment of shared recognition that fear had been transformed into hope. The Varelians began to witness a new truth. The Deathworlders' reputation for danger was not incompatible with compassion. Their adaptability and resilience, qualities that had inspired fear for centuries, could be applied in ways that saved lives and strengthened communities. This realization was profound. For a civilization that had prided itself on knowledge, diplomacy, and preparedness, that humans were teaching a lesson in courage, ingenuity, and moral strength that transcended traditional definitions of power. By the end of this critical moment, the Varelians' perspective had shifted dramatically. What had begun as an encounter defined by fear, tension, and uncertainty had transformed into one of collaboration, respect, and cautious optimism. The humans, through their actions, had demonstrated that being a Deathworlder did not mean being a destroyer. It meant being adaptable, fearless, and capable of extraordinary problem-solving, even under extreme pressure, but also capable of choosing to use those qualities to help rather than harm. The stakes had been highest, emotions were rawest, and the consequences most immediate. The critical moment was not a single action but a series of unfolding events that tested the Varelians' assumptions, challenged their fears, and revealed the true nature of the humans. By the time the immediate emergencies in the colonies were stabilized, Varelians across the planet had come to a new understanding. The humans' arrival was not the end of their civilization, but potentially the beginning of a historic alliance that could redefine what it meant to face danger, uncertainty, and the unknown. The lessons of this moment would be remembered for generations. The Varelians had confronted myths, fears, and expectations and discovered that reality could be far more complex and far more hopeful than any story or legend. The humans, the legendary Deathworlders, had arrived not to conquer, but to aid. The critical moment had passed, leaving the planet forever changed, its citizens enlightened and inspired by the courage, adaptability, and morality of a species they had feared for centuries. After the tense and life-changing encounter with the humans, the Varelians began to experience the full impact of the resolution phase. What had started as a terrifying arrival of legendary Deathworlders had transformed into an event that would redefine the very idea of cooperation, trust, and survival. The initial fear that had gripped the planet was now slowly replaced by awe, admiration, and cautious optimism. The humans, with their calm professionalism, resourcefulness, and willingness to assist, were proving that their reputation as a fearsome species could coexist with extraordinary empathy and skill. The first priority of the humans was the stabilization of the outer colonies that had sent the distress signals. These areas had been devastated by natural disasters, a combination of violent storms, seismic activity, and environmental damage that Varelian technology had struggled to fully prevent. Buildings had collapsed, power systems had failed, and water supplies had been contaminated. The Varelian authorities had been trying to manage the crisis, but the scale was overwhelming. The humans, however, approached the situation methodically, assessing the most urgent needs first. Medical teams were deployed immediately to the most critically affected areas. Humans, alongside Varelian doctors, began treating injured civilians with remarkable efficiency. Their knowledge of first aid, emergency medical procedures, and triage systems was far beyond what the Varelians had seen. Even with their advanced medical technology, tents and temporary hospitals were erected quickly, and the treatment of the wounded became a coordinated effort. Children, the elderly, and those trapped under debris were rescued with skill and precision. The humans' ability to remain calm under pressure inspired confidence and hope, turning scenes of panic into organized recovery efforts. Engineering teams worked tirelessly to repair damaged infrastructure. Power grids, communication networks, and transportation systems had been disrupted by the disasters. Humans, familiar with operating in extreme conditions, adapted their technology to work with Varelian systems. They repaired energy conduits, restored communications, and cleared roads, allowing emergency services to function effectively. Citizens who had been anxious and helpless found themselves observing the humans and Varelians working together, forming an unexpected partnership that showcased ingenuity and cooperation. One of the most remarkable aspects of the humans' work was their ability to solve problems on the spot. Many of the outer colonies had unique challenges: buildings constructed with materials unfamiliar to the humans, environmental hazards that required immediate attention, and logistical puzzles that demanded rapid coordination. Yet, the humans adapted. They improvised tools, designed makeshift solutions, and coordinated with Varelians to ensure that resources were used efficiently. Each success, no matter how small, built confidence among the citizens and demonstrated the humans' remarkable ability to thrive in adversity. The Varelian military, initially skeptical of the humans' intent, observed their work with growing admiration. The humans demonstrated a level of discipline, coordination, and tactical thinking that impressed even the most seasoned officers. It became clear that the Deathworlders' legendary adaptability and resourcefulness could be applied constructively. What had been a species feared for destruction was now a partner in problem solving, showing that courage and skill could be used for protection and aid as well as survival throughout the process. The humans maintained a respectful and cooperative approach. They listened to Varelian authorities, followed local protocols, and made sure that their actions complemented the planet's existing systems rather than replacing them. This consideration reinforced trust and allowed the resolution efforts to proceed smoothly. Citizens began to participate as well, volunteering to assist with reconstruction, medical care, and logistics. What had begun as fear transformed into a collective effort to rebuild and recover. Guided by the humans' leadership and example, the council recognized that the situation had shifted from crisis management to a historic collaboration. They began to document every step of the process, analyzing the humans' methods and strategies for future reference. Meetings were held to discuss lessons learned and to formalize cooperation plans. The humans approached combining practical problem-solving, adaptability, and empathy was something that the Varelians had never experienced on such a scale. It became clear that the resolution was not simply about repairing damage but about creating a foundation for long-term partnership and understanding between the two species. Education and knowledge sharing became a key part of the resolution process. Humans and Varelians collaborated on workshops, training sessions, and simulations to prepare local teams for future challenges. Children observed these efforts with fascination, asking questions and learning directly from the humans' techniques. Scientists exchanged information about environmental management, engineering solutions, and emergency response strategies. The resolution phase became a learning experience as much as a recovery effort. It strengthening the Varelian skills while demonstrating the humans' willingness to share knowledge rather than dominate. The emotional impact on the population was profound. Citizens who had initially been paralyzed by fear were now inspired by what they witnessed. Families who had lost homes or loved ones began to see hope for the future. Communities that had been fragmented by panic and uncertainty were coming together to rebuild and assist one another. The humans' presence acted as a catalyst, transforming fear into courage and uncertainty into confidence. The resolution was not only physical but psychological, healing the trauma caused by both the natural disasters and the initial fear of the Deathworlders' arrival. Even the Varelian scholars, who had spent decades studying the myths of the death, were forced to revise their understanding. The humans had demonstrated qualities long associated with danger and aggression, yet applied them in ways that promoted life, cooperation, and problem-solving. It became clear that the legends, while rooted in truth about human adaptability and resilience, had been misinterpreted over generations. Strength and survival were not synonymous with destruction. The humans' example revealed that power could be exercised responsibly, creatively, and compassionately. As the outer colonies stabilized, attention shifted to broader planetary concerns. Humans assisted in reinforcing city defenses, developing contingency plans, and preparing for potential future disasters. Their strategic thinking, honed by experience in extreme conditions, helped the Varelians improve systems across the planet. What had started as emergency intervention evolved into a long-term improvement of infrastructure, technology, and preparedness. The resolution phase, therefore, extended beyond immediate relief to lasting positive change, strengthening Varelia in ways that no previous generation had imagined. Collaboration was not limited to technical or logistical matters. Humans also engaged with Varelian leaders on social and cultural levels. They learned about local customs, traditions, and values, showing respect for the planet's way of life. In return, the Varelians were curious about the humans' own history, culture, and experiences. Exchanges of ideas, stories, and knowledge enriched both species, fostering understanding and connection that transcended fear and myth. By the end of the resolution phase, the relationship between humans and Varelians had moved from one of uncertainty to mutual respect and partnership. The sense of unity that developed during the resolution was remarkable. Citizens who had initially panicked were now active participants in reconstruction and recovery. Children, inspired by the humans' bravery and problem-solving, began imagining futures where collaboration and ingenuity could overcome challenges. Communities held celebrations to honor both the humans' assistance and the collective resilience of the Varelian people. The critical tension that had defined the earlier phases gave way to pride, accomplishment, and a renewed sense of purpose. The Council documented the entire process, creating detailed records of the humans' methods, the challenges faced, and the strategies used to overcome them. These records would serve as a blueprint for future emergencies and as a historical account of an unprecedented encounter. Lessons learned included the importance of adaptability, the value of clear communication, the necessity of trust, and the power of collaboration under extreme pressure. The resolution phase demonstrated that the humans' presence had not only solved immediate problems but had fundamentally improved the Varelians' ability to respond to crises in the future. Varelia had not only survived the arrival of the Deathworlders but had benefited immensely from it. The outer colonies were stabilized, critical infrastructure was repaired, and the population had regained confidence and hope. The humans had demonstrated that being a Deathworlder did not mean destruction. It meant resilience, intelligence, and the ability to face challenges with courage, adaptability, and empathy. The resolution was comprehensive, physical, emotional, and cultural, leaving a lasting positive impact on the planet. The significance of this phase was clear to everyone involved. What had begun as fear and chaos had transformed into understanding, trust, and partnership. The humans' arrival, once seen as a threat, had become an extraordinary opportunity for growth and learning. Citizens, leaders, and scholars alike realized that the myths they had lived with for centuries had only told part of the story. The true power of the Deathworlders lay not in their potential for destruction, but in their capacity to act decisively, adapt to any situation, and choose to use their skills to help rather than harm. In the aftermath of the resolution, Varelians reflected on how much had changed in such a short period, that humans had arrived, faced challenges, and transformed a situation of fear into one of cooperation and progress. Every citizen, from the youngest child to the oldest scholar, had witnessed history being rewritten. The resolution phase had demonstrated that true strength was not measured by the ability to dominate, but by the ability to face the unknown with intelligence, courage, and empathy. By the time the last tasks in the outer colonies were completed, the Varelians had achieved something remarkable. They had survived a potentially catastrophic encounter with one of the most feared species in the galaxy, and in doing so, they had forged a bond that would define the next chapter of their history. The resolution had not only solved immediate crises but had set the stage for ongoing cooperation, mutual understanding, and the rewriting of long-held assumptions about power, danger, and the unknown. The Varelians learned a lesson that would resonate for generations, that fear is often based on incomplete knowledge, that legends can be misleading, and that even the most intimidating forces can become allies when approached with understanding, openness, and trust. The resolution phase, therefore, was not just about survival. It was about transformation, growth, and the realization that what had seemed like a threat could actually be a profound opportunity for advancement and enlightenment. After the humans completed their work in the outer colonies, Varelia entered a period of calm reflection. The planet had survived what many believed would be a catastrophic encounter, and the effects of the humans' arrival were now becoming fully apparent. The immediate crisis, collapsed buildings, disrupted infrastructure, and injured citizens had been resolved, but the deeper impact on the hearts, minds, and culture of Aurelia was just beginning to unfold. It was a time to think about what had happened, to understand it, and to consider how it would shape the future. Citizens wandered through their neighborhoods, streets, and towns, noticing the repairs and improvements that had been made. Buildings that had been destroyed were now restored, some with stronger foundations and better materials. Roads were cleared and reinforced, and public utilities worked more efficiently than before. People felt a new sense of security and stability, but more importantly, they felt a shift in their perception of the world. What had once seemed frightening and uncontrollable was now something they had faced and survived. Guided by the presence and assistance of a species they had long feared, families spoke quietly about the events that had taken place. Parents recounted to their children what had happened, emphasizing the humans' bravery, skill, and compassion. The stories were told with a mixture of awe and gratitude, teaching the younger generation lessons that went beyond fear and survival. Children who had been terrified during the initial arrival of the fleet now remembered the humans not as monsters, but as helpers, protectors, and extraordinary problems. In homes across the planet, conversations focused on lessons learned, stories of courage, and the power of adaptability and collaboration. The Varelian Council also took time to reflect. Meetings that had once been filled with panic and debate were now occupied with analysis, planning, and preparation for the future. Leaders discussed what the humans' actions revealed about the nature of the Deathworlders and about the assumptions that had guided their society for centuries. They realized that their fears, while understandable, had been based on incomplete knowledge and centuries-old myths. The humans had demonstrated that strength and adaptability could be applied not to destruction, but to aid protection and constructive problem-solving. The Council's reflection extended to broader societal lessons. Citizens had observed that fear and hesitation could paralyze even the most advanced civilization, but that courage, adaptability, and calm decision-making could turn potential disasters into opportunities for growth. Schools and educational institutions began to integrate these lessons into their teachings, emphasizing critical thinking, resourcefulness, and cooperation. Children learned not only about the events themselves but about the values demonstrated by both humans and Varelians during the crisis: courage, ingenuity, empathy, and unity. Varelian scholars revisited their historical records. They examined the myths, legends, and earlier accounts of the Deathworlders, seeking to understand why their stories had emphasized fear and destruction so heavily. Through analysis, they discovered that much of the historical record had focused on moments of human survival in extreme environments, often misinterpreting resilience and ingenuity as aggression. The humans' recent actions clarified centuries of misunderstanding, showing that their strength lay in adaptability and problem-solving rather than raw violence. This revelation transformed the way Varelians approached their understanding of other species in the galaxy beyond education and scholarship. The social and cultural impact of the humans' arrival became evident in everyday life. Citizens who had initially panicked began to see the value of collaboration and cooperation. Community groups formed to assist in rebuilding neighborhoods, supporting families, and preparing for future emergencies. The humans had shown that working together, sharing knowledge, and using skills creatively could overcome even the most daunting challenges. These lessons became part of the social fabric of Varelia, influencing how people approached not just emergencies, but everyday problems and opportunities. Emotionally, the Varelians experienced a profound shift. Many who had feared for their lives now felt a deep sense of gratitude and respect toward the humans. They understood that their survival had depended not only on their own preparedness, but also on the courage, skills, and compassion of these extraordinary visitors. Stories of individuals saved, communities restored, and disasters mitigated became part of the collective memory of the planet. These stories were recounted not with fear, but with pride and inspiration, serving as reminders of what could be achieved through courage and collaboration. The humans themselves became a symbol of resilience and problems. Their calm demeanor under pressure, their ability to adapt to unexpected circumstances, and their willingness to prioritize aid over aggression set an example for Varelians at every level of society. Citizens discussed and analyzed the humans' actions, drawing lessons for personal growth, civic responsibility, and ethical decision-making. The humans' arrival, once seen as a moment of terror, had become a turning point that inspired the entire planet to reconsider what it meant to be strong, capable, and responsible. Even on a political level, the aftermath of the humans' arrival was transformative. The Council considered ways to formalize cooperation with the humans, establishing communication channels and agreements that could benefit both species in the future. The crisis had revealed the potential for partnership rather than conflict, and the leaders of Varelia recognized that maintaining this relationship could strengthen their planet's position in the galaxy. Strategic plans were developed not only to protect Varelia, but to share knowledge, technology, and experience with the humans in ways that would be mutually beneficial. The resolution of the crisis also sparked reflection on the nature of fear and myth itself. For centuries, the Deathworlders had been viewed solely as a terrifying force, a species to be feared above all others. Yet the reality of their arrival had demonstrated that myths often simplify and distort the truth. Varelians began to appreciate the importance of observation, experience, and critical thinking over assumptions and inherited beliefs. They understood that fear could be both protective and limiting, and that confronting the unknown with open-mindedness and preparedness could lead to unexpected and positive outcomes. Communities throughout the planet engaged in celebrations, ceremonies, and gatherings to honor both the humans' assistance and the resilience of the Varelians themselves. Streets were decorated, public speeches were given, and individuals who had contributed to the recovery were recognized. That humans were included in these celebrations as honored guests, symbolizing the extraordinary bond that had been formed during the crisis. Citizens experienced a collective sense of pride, not only in their survival, but in the opportunity to witness and participate in something historically significant. Reflection also extended to the younger generation, who had experienced the events firsthand. Children who had been terrified of the fleet and its legendary occupants now spoke of courage, problem-solving, and hope. Schools held discussions about adaptability, teamwork, and the value of helping others in times of crisis. The humans' actions became part of the curriculum, serving as examples of how intelligence, bravery, and compassion could transform even the most dangerous situations into opportunities for growth and learning. Beyond education, the humans' arrival encouraged the Varelians to reconsider their approach to interstellar relations. Previously, fear had guided much of their thinking about other species. Encounters were often approached with suspicion and caution, assuming the worst-case scenario. But the humans' example demonstrated that while caution was wise, assumptions based solely on fear could limit understanding, opportunity, and progress. The Council began to discuss strategies for engaging with other species in ways that balanced caution with openness, using this historic encounter as a model for diplomacy, cooperation, and mutual respect. The personal experiences of individuals also reflected the transformative power of the aftermath. Citizens who had once felt powerless found inspiration in the humans' example. Volunteers who had assisted in rebuilding the colonies spoke of newfound confidence and pride in their abilities. Scientists and engineers who had worked alongside the humans gained insights and techniques that would shape their work for years to come. Families who had experienced trauma found comfort in the solidarity, skill, and care demonstrated by both the humans and their fellow Varelians. The emotional healing was as important as the physical rebuilding, and it extended across the planet. In the weeks following the humans' departure, Varelia experienced a quiet but profound transformation. The lessons learned during the crisis were integrated into societal structures, emergency preparedness plans, and educational programs. Citizens continued to reflect on the events, discussing them in community gatherings, academic forums, and private conversations. Stories of bravery, ingenuity, and empathy became a central part of the planet's narrative, shaping how Varelians understood themselves and their place in the universe. The long-term reflection also included an awareness of humility. The humans' arrival had reminded the Varelians that no civilization, no matter how advanced, was immune to the unknown or the extraordinary. Preparation, intelligence, and careful planning were essential, but adaptability, courage, and collaboration were equally critical. The encounter with the Deathworlders had been a humbling experience, teaching the Varelians that true strength lay not only in technology or knowledge, but in the ability to respond wisely and morally to unexpected challenges. On a cultural level, art, literature, and media began to reflect the events and their lessons. Paintings, stories, songs, and plays depicted the humans' arrival, their acts of bravery, and the cooperation between species. These creative expressions reinforced the themes of resilience, adaptability, and compassion, embedding them deeply into the collective consciousness of Varelian. Citizens experienced not only the historical impact, but also the cultural enrichment that arose from understanding and interpreting the events creatively. The philosophical implications of the humans' arrival were also significant. Scholars, thinkers, and spiritual leaders debated the nature of strength, fear, and morality. They explored the idea that true courage was not simply the absence of fear, but the ability to act wisely and compassionately in the face of it. They discussed how myths could distort truth, but also how understanding and observation could reveal deeper realities. The reflection on these ideas influenced policies, education, and social values across the planet. By the time months had passed, Varelia had fully integrated the lessons of the encounter into its societal framework. Emergency response systems were improved, interspecies communication protocols were developed, and the population was more aware of the importance of adaptability and collaboration. Citizens no longer saw the Deathworlders solely as a threat, but as a species capable of extraordinary skill and moral choice, a reminder that assumptions must always be tested by experience. The aftermath phase also included ongoing dialogue with humans. Even as they returned to their homeworld, they maintained communication channels with Varelia, offering advice, sharing knowledge, and continuing collaborative projects. These interactions reinforced the bonds formed during the crisis, creating opportunities for long-term cooperation and mutual growth. Varelians realized that relationships with other species could be sources of learning, strength, and innovation, rather than solely opportunities for conflict or caution. Finally, reflection on the event highlighted the enduring lesson of hope. Despite fear, uncertainty, and the potential for disaster, the Varelians had witnessed an extraordinary example of courage, adaptability, and compassion. That humans had turned a moment that could have ended in destruction into one of growth, learning, and unity. The citizens of Varelia recognized that while the unknown could be frightening, it could also offer opportunities for understanding, partnership, and progress. The planet had survived, learned, and been transformed, and the memory of this historic encounter would inspire generations to come in every home, school, and council chamber. The story was recounted not as a tale of fear, but as a story of resilience, intelligence, and moral choice. The humans, once feared as Deathworlders, had shown that true strength lay in using one's abilities to help rather than harm, to adapt and solve problems rather than dominate, and to approach the unknown with courage, skill, and empathy. Varelia, forever changed, would carry these lessons forward, shaping a future defined by cooperation, understanding, and hope in ways no one could have imagined before the critical arrival of the Deathworlders.